why does training like a bodybuilder work so well in making you jump higher? Why? Right? We've learned and seen over the years that you gotta lift super heavy. You gotta lift like a power lifter or an Olympic weightlifter. And that's more specific to jumping higher. But if you've seen my workouts, I've jumped higher doing reps in the 8 to 12 range. I've jumped higher doing reps in the 14 range. Why is this?
Acutely?
Like I did a cycle where you had me do freaking 4x14 back squats
It's
in
crazy.
2022. And then I deloaded and I hit the kamikaze.
Who even are you? Who even are you? You hit the
Is
kamikaze. Who even are you?
Oh, I have a 50.5-inch vertical. It is what I identify as.
Oh, I identify as the world's best vertical jump coach.
And together we have a joint business where we coach guys how to jump higher.
Yeah. And you too can identify as a vertical jumper if you sign up at THPstrength.com.
You can identify as someone that improves their vertical jump.
Yes, which is a rarity these days.
If you want to identify as someone who doesn't improve, go sign up for a different program.
that was delinquent.
All right. So John, why? Why does doing these high rep ranges, why do we do it in our training?
Is my mic clipping or does it sound okay?
It sounds beautiful.
Oh, perfect. So we do it because we want to see the physiological adaptations that happen as a result of high volume. So when you do high volume, there's a few things that happen. One, you're going to see a change in cross-sectional area. That is the size of your muscle. If you were to cut it in half, then you would have a slab. Like if you've ever seen anyone cut deli meat, as disgusting as that is, that's basically what we're using as cross-sectional area. So when you do high volume training, you're seeing that change in getting bigger, usually because of the amount of sarcoplasmic reticulum typically going up. So, or not the amount of it will go up, but that area where the sarcoplasm is and the sarcoplasmic reticulum around it is also going to increase, which means that you potentially have more calcium ions, and that is going to allow you to potentially have more cross bridging of myosin to actin, which will allow you to have better force generation, especially over longer intervals. So that's one potential mechanism. The other one is that you actually have the myosin and actin increasing in number or size. I'd have to verify exactly which one it is, but that is also another mechanism for cross-sectional area changing. Now, when you're looking at force, the number one determinant is the cross-sectional area of the muscle. So when you're doing high volume, your cross-sectional area goes up. We know that the amount of force that you can generate is likely also going to go up. So as a result of doing that high volume, again, we have the capacity to create more force. Now, when it comes to the nervous system, that's not necessarily going to be the driver of the adaptation unless you're like a total newbie. But in Isaiah's case, I think what happens is you have so many reps building basically that motor coordination, I would call it, to where you don't necessarily need to always be doing high force, type 2 fiber oriented, high rate coded, high motor unit recruitment activity. I think that just increasing the general size of your muscle fibers is going to give you access to more force. You can actualize it very quickly. And then the second reason that we do it is that it is training to train. We know that the structural adaptations to the tendons from hypertrophy work are such that its cross-sectional area also increases. The cross-sectional area or the bone density can also just increase, especially if you're untrained from any resistance training. So that's also to your benefit. The enzymes that are associated with muscular endurance are probably going to increase their density as well, meaning you have more capability to handle workload. So when we do those higher, more intense training cycles, we now can handle them because we've prepared for it in the previous cycle. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's this perfect preparation, because there's a lot of other things that you have to do, right? Like we do elastic storage as well, and we do sprinting and other activities in conjunction with it. But I think what happens is you just give yourself more access to force production. Specifically, if you're going to do a lot of hypertrophy work in your lower body, right? You typically don't see a lot of great 2-foot jumpers with no quad mass whatsoever. I can't think of anyone that's really built like a high jumper that is like the best 2 foot jumper. Typically, the best 2 foot jumpers are going to have a considerable amount of quad
Yeah.
mass.
Like
So that,
I've
yeah,
seen, yeah, like I hate when guys do this. When we say do XYZ to jump high, and then they're like, but this athlete doesn't have XYZ and he jumps high. Our measure of what high means is different from you, right? We're talking about the best. Like we're talking your vertical is 49 inches and above. What does that look like? You can get we've seen skinny guys essentially have like a mid 40s vertical, right? I think a lot like I remember when we
look at
were
Donovan.
testing we were testing athletes vertical at dunk camp like during it was like a AEU tournament and we had a vertec out and we just had random guys test their vertical. And I remember there was this kid who was like 6'3", South Sudanese. No, like he had just you could see his femur. It was like femur and then kneecap and then calf. And weirdest plant ever. He was like his knees were about to touch. He was super internally rotated.
He didn't have a penultimate step either. It was like a short one, right?
Yeah, super long levers, and he touched 12 feet. But he long ass arms, right? He probably had like a 43-inch vertical. Now, when we're talking about the best, the guys that jump the highest off 2 feet, I've never not seen someone with quads. Like I remember even Jaw when we looked at Jaw Morant's training and he had his shorts rolled up and his freaking thigh, like he has big old thighs, right? A lot of guys look at guys in basketball shorts and you just see like their calves and they might have like a really high Achilles tendon and like a ball of muscle for their calf and they're like, oh, he has skinny legs, but you actually measure their thigh and like how they're built, like the mass that they have for like their build size, and like it's you need some muscle in those quads and your hips too, and your hips to produce more force. One thing I will say is I want to expand on the train to train point because I don't want guys to look at this and be like, this is how you jump high, and then they just start doing straight hypertrophy training. I think the main reason athletes jump higher, like we look at someone like Austin, he got into a hypertrophy cycle, freaking leveled up his 1 foot and 2 foot bounce, and it kind of goes against what we believe in training. I think that the reason that is because guys are getting fitter. You're taking a guy that's not in shape or not in very good shape or as good of a shape as they could be, and you just get them way more fit. Their body comp becomes a lot better. Their work capacity goes up. Right? They probably get stronger, especially someone that hasn't been training with a very high quality. And then you just jump higher as a result of that. Versus if you were to take like an already fit athlete and then give him a hypertrophy cycle, I don't think you would see the same result of like just jumping high, like their highest or close to their highest
So
from
you're
that.
saying like a track guy doing a lot
Yeah.
of volume and stuff like that, like
Yeah,
thorough,
yeah.
getting fit. You're
Yeah,
probably
like
not
if your
gonna see
training
that
has
much
been
of a
super
difference.
robust, you've been training for a while, and then you do a hypertrophy cycle, that's different from someone that's like
What about you?
I fall under that same camp. Every time I've jumped high, and by high, like, because I wanna define that, like, within my 90%, of my all-time best or 95%. Every time I've done that from a hypertrophy cycle, it's when I've basically come off an injury or a point where I, like, detrain because 'cause I'm competing a lot. So my fitness is, like, down, like, it feels like I'm not, like, in very good shape. And then I think that's what happens is I just get in really good shape and then I get healthy is the other thing. Like during high volume cycles, I tend to just feel really good. Um, so I think those are the two reasons why I tend to jump pretty high. But I think in order to get to 100%, right? Not just jump 48, 49. Like if I want to jump 50 plus, it's train to train, then do high specificity, and that's when you get the really good numbers.
Yeah, it'll be fun to see what happens after this cycle because it's still general because there's like the pauses and things like that, but there is a layer of specificity with the intensity. So I'll be curious to see what happens when we test and then also see where your vertical is kind of at. The one downside is that potentially the testing could be too intense and then it might actually be
Like you're saying,
detrimental
like
to
test
jump
my
session.
like my maxes and stuff.
I'm saying we test your maxes and your vertical. Like if we test your maxes, it might kind of fuck over the jump session. But
Yeah,
I'll be curious to see what happens with those weight room numbers and then also where your vertical's at. If we decide to, not really care about the weight room as much and really go push on the vertical side of things, which not testing per se, but just have a dunk session and see how your vertical is. Cause I think like we previously talked about, the more testing you do, the worse off your tendon usually is. What's going to happen? Because yeah, I have a feeling that when the intensity is that high, it just either A, bangs you up, or B, just fatigues those systems enough. I think what happens when we do the hypertrophy work following it, you always feel better because the intensity is lower, specificity is lower, and so your joints feel a little better, your your cartilage feels a little bit better, your tendons feel a little bit better, you're just less overall loaded, and you're starting to see some of the other previous work actualize, and then you perform at a really high level. I think it's like that balancing act of things are really general in the weight room or all these other areas, and on the court I'm really, really specific, right?
yeah,
Generally that's what you want to do in training, right? As I'm coaching a high jumper, like 3-4 months in, I'm the most specific I'm going to be, right? Like we're talking, if I'm a collegiate athlete, I come in the fall, I start doing training in September, late September or mid September, sometimes earlier. So you have September, October, November, December. You're in indoor in January. So, or January, December. Basically, I mean, you go typically on Christmas break, you have a meet, then you go to Christmas break, then you're like really in the indoor season, January, February, March. And
yeah,
during that time, you can still be a little bit specific because, like, typically what they'll do is get people really fit those first couple months, and then specificity climbs up, and then it's just like sharpening, what you need to, right? So we're testing fly times or 200 times in would have been probably November, right before break, right before Thanksgiving break. We're testing where's your 150 time? What's your 120 time? What's your 10-meter fly time? If you're doing that, you've touched on a lot of those really specific qualities for a period of time. And then as we're moving into they come back, it's mid January. We do a little bit of fitness work and then you're into meets. And then when you're into meets, it's like you're performing on the weekend. You might get one cell day in and then a little bit of fitness work, maybe a second sprint day, but even then it's really low volume and you're competing again on the weekend. You do that basically throughout the rest of the time, right? You're not going crazy in the weight room. You're not putting up huge numbers in squat or lunge or power clean or whatever it is, because you know that you're going to crush yourself on the track if you do that. You're not going to be able to bounce back for those meets and perform at a reasonably high level. For Isaiah, we don't have specific meets, but it's like I know that in March, when All Star Weekend is, or February, it's February, right? Middle of
yeah,
February. So I know around that time that I need to start backing off leading into it, because he's probably going to want to be jumping high. Why? Typically he gets 2 to 3 events. There's always something that he wants to be jumping reasonably high at. 2 years ago, it was dunk camp. And then I think he had the Google Pixel show, but you hurt
yeah.
yourself, so you didn't do it. And then the following year was
That's
the last
crazy. That's
year.
about to be
And
2 years.
yeah, I know, it's crazy. And then this past year was Google Pixel, and that was it. Just Google Pixel.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Around February.
Yeah. And then we went to the Venice Beach, or what is it? The hoop bus thing.
Yeah, at
But that
Google
was like
Pixel.
not supposed to happen. But
Yeah,
regardless, I anticipate that things like that will happen. So we go through that period of time, and then he's jumping reasonably high, comes back to 50.5 within like a month or so of that. So we're kind of still in that competitive phase. And then we started that new cycle, would have been end of March. So it was like March, April, May, June. We were at dunk camp,
yeah,
right? And had that overreaching period. I think when you're viewing volume in that whole context, you get it at the tail ends, or like hypertrophy work, and not necessarily the total sets, but or sorry, the total reps, but the rep ranges are going to be kind of in that 8 to 14 ish range. I mean, you might be less than that, but it's because once you start to get less than 6 reps, odds are to get any level of meaningful adaptation, because you're not really going to see the adaptation to hypertrophy if you're at 6 reps and you're at like 70% or 60%. That's really not doing anything, right? At that point, you maybe maintain a little bit of the neurological aspects, maybe some of the muscle fiber hypertrophy you maintain, or the sarcoplasmic reticulum, like we were talking about, or calcium, um, the ability to release calcium, move it in and out, and some of the other stuff. But you're not really seeing any meaningful adaptation. You're just maintaining at that point. And then if you're, way above in that higher percentages at 6 reps or whatever, you're probably doing damage to yourself. So you've got to stay in this in between of like, if I go up to 8 to 12 reps, now I can see a considerable amount of maintenance to those neurological aspects, like we talked about those lower percentages, but we're also seeing systems fatigue that don't necessarily impede his ability or an athlete's ability to produce crazy high force, right? It's still high force, but it's not like sprinting where you're dealing with what are like, I think it's 5 times body weight on a single leg and the blink of an eye or faster, or in jumping where you're seeing a landing forces of anywhere from, I feel like it's like 6 to 12 times body weight.
Yeah.
Like the forces are crazy. So you want to see it at the bookends because it fits really nicely at the beginning when you're training to train, and then really nicely at the end where you're able to maintain fitness with it, but not take away from the qualities that we want to see be at their best, right? Tendon health has to be at its best. Back health has to be at its best. Rate of force development has to be at its best. If I'm having Isaiah clean 300 pounds, like he did the other day, power clean 300 pounds, he's screwed. Like he's not going to be able to jump very high. Or if I'm having him do triples and backs or front squat at 330, he's going to be banged up from that. His joints aren't going to feel good. Nervous system's going to be flat, might be sore. It's just not going to be.
You're describing how I feel right now.
Yeah, you're not going to be conducive to. It's not going to be conducive to you jumping very high in that moment. That's why I said it'll be interesting to see what happens week 4, right? If you don't jump high, I'm going to be like, yeah, that kind of tracks. We did do triples at 100% of what you're capable of.
Yeah.
Or sets of, was it 4?
Sets of 3.
Sets of 3. Okay.
I think if I were to back off, I could jump really high. I mean, we always mention like the basement increasing as like a good metric, and like I even realized that last weekend. Like last weekend I was feeling horrible at my session, but I was still jumping high, like at the beginning.
High,
yeah, like with no hype and stuff. And I was kind of realizing, I'm like, okay, like I feel different. I've become a different athlete. I always say that, like, you have to become a different organism. What's the point of training? We're literally like, you got to transform.
This happens every fall.
Yeah. Literally. It's like the highest quality training is always.
It's always.
It's because I'm out of freaking competing and usually getting healthier at that point.
You don't have any events, and it's like you haven't been training hard for a while, and you're eager to train.
Yeah.
Like it just always ends up being, life is very predictable at this time. The seasons are kind of, stopping you from doing a lot of events because you're like, well, I got my wife's birthday, and then I got Thanksgiving, and then I got Christmas, and then New Year or whatever. And then it's like, okay, February hits, fuck, the gauntlet starts. It's time for events and travel and all this other shit. But I feel like it's a good place to start. I know you got to get going. So that's a good place to. Oh, stop.
You said start.
That's a good place to start.
Now we start the podcast.
That's a good place for Isaiah to start his trek home. I mean, to the dealership. So that being said, if you guys are interested in getting coaching, go to THPstrength.com. We love what we do. We're super passionate about it. We want people to get better. That is what we do for. That said, we will see you guys tomorrow. I don't know what the topic is, but I don't know.
We pull from a hat these days.
Yeah, we just pull from a hat. All right, see you guys.
We should make a hat, like a hat with topics.
Bye.